That was Yehuda Solomon doing a Havdalah ceremony last Saturday night. How is everybody? It's great to be with you. Starting the week right, learning some beautiful, beautiful Torah on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness with a new wisdom candle. Who is with us on a Saturday night, starting their week off right? Sharon in New Jersey, Paul in the Great Northwest, Arnold in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Belle in North Texas, Kat in Canterbury, Bill says shalom from mid-Missouri. Have I mentioned how much I'm looking forward to Shabbos in autumn? I'm so impressed with all the East Coast people that check in on a Saturday night so late for you. It's incredible. Yitzhak in Kansas City, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. All right, let's get into it. Quick announcement. Tomorrow night, Nina and I are going to a wedding. So no class tomorrow night. We'll have an announcement on the Facebook page. No class tomorrow night. Sunday night, no class. And we'll do a double daf on Monday to get caught up, because we're going to a wedding. We should always have to miss things for such beautiful simchas as a wedding. Okay, our daf. Today's page is page 45, Mem Hey, here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 4, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 3. This tractate is about the law of marriage contracts. And what are the rights and obligations of the spouses spelled out in that contract. But as we've seen, we begin by asking, what is the dowry? What is the marriage payment to which a woman is entitled? That the sages set a minimum for her. If she was a virgin when she entered the marriage, it's going to be a larger amount than if she was not a virgin. Because of that, we had a bunch of discussions in chapter 3 about the law of the rapist and of the seducer. Here in chapter 4, we're eventually moving to the actual rights and obligations within the marriage, but we're still sort of looking at the sort of journey of the young woman from her father's house to her husband's house, right, when she leaves her father's house and gets married. And if problems or tragedies or difficulties arise along the way, who is held responsible? If a payment has to be made, is it made to her? Is it made to her father? This Mishnah number 3, I mean, it's uncomfortable, but it's really uncomfortable, right? So it's talking about a woman who's found to have committed adultery. So she was either betrothed or fully married. She went and had marital relations outside of her marriage with some other man. She becomes liable to the death penalty. And then the type of death penalty is different. If she's a young woman, if she's a minor, there's no death penalty. If she's a young woman, it's stoning. If she's a grown woman, it's strangulation. What's interesting about what we're learning here in this Mishnah and the Gemara's on is there's no incidents, right? It's all hypothetical. And as we'll see, they're going to use this law as a basis for a more general law and a more general principle of what happens when somebody commits a crime and then their status changes. So, for example, if you commit a crime when you're pre-adult and it doesn't come out until you're an adult, So are you sentenced as an adult or as a minor? So that's part of the discussion. But also this can affect the law of a king or a high priest who committed a crime before, or just a transgression. Doesn't necessarily have to be an actual crime. But for a transgression that they committed before they became king or before they became high priest, and it didn't come out until their status had changed. Why does that matter? Because, for certain transgressions, a commoner brings one kind of an offering and a king brings a different offering. So if he committed that transgression when he was a commoner and then he became king, does he bring the offering of a commoner or of a king? Of course, that would only be relevant when the temple is standing, since we don't bring offerings, haven't for the last 2,000 years. But as we'll see, this law, which, if you kind of imagine this young woman, who had sex while she was betrothed to some guy that she maybe only met once, and suddenly she's subject to the death penalty. But this probably never happened in the history of the Jewish people, because for her to actually receive the death penalty, she would have had to have been warned that if she had sex, then the penalty would be death, and then she received the warning and had the sex in the presence of two witnesses. It's just not going to happen. But the underlying principle is why this is being studied meticulously, because that principle can apply in totally unexpected and seemingly unrelated areas of the law. So we pick this up at the bottom of page 44b. Shaila, right, Rabbi Shaila, taught in a baraisa, there are three different circumstances with regard to a young woman. Recall, a young woman is a woman who has hit puberty but has not hit adulthood. It's a 6-month period in her life, more or less. Shaila taught in a baraisa, there are three different circumstances with regard to a young woman who has been defamed. Right, so this is one who is accused of having committed adultery. Maybe it's true, maybe if it's false. If it's false, then the criminal is the defamer and he will suffer a penalty. Right? So there are three different circumstances with regard to a young woman who has been defamed. If witnesses came to testify about her when she was living in her father-in-law's house, i.e., after she was married, and stated that she committed adultery in her father's house, right, before she married and moved to her husband's house and who lives with his father, that she committed adultery while she was betrothed, right, and still living in her own father's house during the period of betrothal before marriage. If that's when she committed adultery, so then her penalty, right, her consequences is that she receives a death penalty. And what form is it? One stones her at the entrance to her father's house, as though to say, see what you have brought up. Right, that she's living in her father-in-law's house, but the adultery happened when she was living at her father's house, and it's kind of a punishment that, obviously she suffers a death penalty, but it's also to humiliate her father because somehow he failed in bringing up a virtuous girl. If witnesses came to testify about her when she was still living in her father's house, i.e. when she was betrothed, and that she committed the adultery then, before she had moved out, that she committed it while she was living in her father's house, and the information came to light while she was still living in her father's house, then one stones her at the entrance to the gate of the city to further publicize that this is what's done when somebody receives the death penalty. If she went astray and sinned when she was a young woman and subsequently reached majority, i.e. she became a grown woman, then she is sentenced to strangulation, right? That's the death penalty for a adult woman who commits adultery, a married woman who sleeps with a Jewish man. Both of them are subject to the death penalty, and the death penalty is strangulation, not stoning, which is in the case of the young woman versus the adult. The Gemara asks, now we're on 45a, the Gemara asks with regard to this law, is that to say that in any case where her body has changed after her sin, meaning she became an adult, the manner in which she is put to death changes as well? The Gemara raises a contradiction from the following baraisa. If there is a betrothed young woman who allegedly committed adultery after she reached majority, she married and her husband defamed her, accusing her of having committed adultery during the period of betrothal, he is not flogged and does not give the 100 selah if she is proven innocent, as these punishments are limited to one who defames a young woman. right? So the Torah is very specific that if a man marries a woman, right, she comes into his house as his wife when she's a young woman, and he expects her to be a virgin because she's a young woman. He has that legal presumption. And then it turns out that she's not a virgin, and he accuses her sort of to the elders of the city. Okay, so if it's true, very problematic for her and her family. Or maybe this guy is a liar and he just decided that he didn't want to be married to her anymore. And the way that he's going to try to get out of this marriage is to accuse his new young wife of that she wasn't a virgin when she came into his house. If her parents can then prove that this new husband is a liar, his penalty is he has to give a very large financial payment. And like the rapist and the seducer, he is forced, if she wants, to marry her, remain married to her, and he may never divorce her. He loses the right to ever divorce her, and he has to support her for the rest of his life. And maybe he's flogged. Okay, so if there's a betrothed young woman who allegedly committed adultery, after she reached majority, she married and her husband defamed her, accusing her of having committed adultery during the period of betrothal. He's not flogged, and he doesn't give the 100 selah if she's proven innocent, as these punishments are limited by the Torah. The specific law is it applies to a young woman, not to an adult woman. However, if she is guilty, she and her conspiring witnesses are brought early in the morning to the place of stoning. And this proves that although her body changed between the time of the sin and the time of the punishment, she is stoned nonetheless, rather than strangled, as would be the punishment for an adult. Again, we're in this hypothetical realm, because this probably doesn't happen in real life, but it's the principle that we're after. So the Gemara digresses to analyze the last clause of this Baraisa. Can it enter your mind to say that both she and her conspiring witnesses, i.e. witnesses who falsely testified that she committed adultery, that they're both executed? I mean, if conspiring witnesses came to lie and accuse her of having committed adultery when she didn't, they are going to be executed. Why would she be executed? Rather, the text of the Baraisa should be amended so that it reads, either she or her conspiring witnesses are brought early in the morning to the place of stoning. The point that the Baraisa was making is that in this case, where she committed the adultery while she was a young woman, and the husband found out about it later after she's an adult, she's still being punished with the punishment of a young woman, stoning, versus the punishment of an adult, strangulation. If indeed the reason she was being accused of not being a virgin is because two witnesses came forward and conspired to lie about her, then as in all cases of conspiring witnesses, they receive the punishment that the defendant or the accused would have received if their lying testimony somehow held up in court. So since they're accusing her of adultery, she would be stoned. So instead they are stoned to death. In answer to the contradiction, Rava said, a defamer, you said. A defamer is different, as it is a novel law. Certain that in this case of the husband bringing an accusation against his wife, that she was not a virgin, and we're finding out that, well, if she became not a virgin when she was a young woman, then and he accuses her when she's an adult, she's still punished with the punishment of a young woman. But the case of the defamer is different than the simple case of adultery. A defamer is different, as it is a novel law. Certain aspects of this case do not apply to other laws, as generally, if a woman who entered the wedding canopy and did not yet have intercourse with her husband subsequently committed adultery, she is executed by strangulation, which is the punishment for a married woman who committed adultery. However, in the case of a defamer, if the woman is guilty, she is executed by stoning, despite the fact that if she would commit the sin in her current state as a married woman, she would be executed via strangulation. This proves that in the case of defamation, the method of execution is determined by the time when the sin was committed, although her status has changed. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said to Rava, perhaps when the Merciful One introduced the novelty of the law of a defamer, it was applied only to a case where her body has not yet changed, right? Has not changed, has not become a legal adult, and she is still a young woman. However, in a case where her body has changed and she has become a grown woman, the Merciful One did not introduce the novelty of this law, and she is liable to strangulation, just as she would be liable to that form of death penalty if she had committed the sin as a grown woman. Rather, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, this question of whether the method of execution changes or does not change if she has become a grown woman or not, is actually a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, as we learned in the Mishnah in Tractate Horayos on page 10a, with regard to the special offering of a high priest or a king who sinned unwittingly. If they sinned before they were appointed, before they became king or high priest, and they were subsequently appointed after committing the sin, and it was an unwitting sin, and they didn't even know that they had committed the sin, and they became aware of their transgression only after their appointment, right? So let's say that the sin was they ate something that wasn't kosher. Maybe it was a nevela, a kosher animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. So a Jew cannot eat that. But you can't tell from the meat on the plate whether it was slaughtered properly or not. So he ate it the night before his coronation when he became king. And then after he became king, somebody said, oh, by the way, you didn't eat that meat that was served the night before the coronation, did you? That was a nevela. And so he committed an unwitting sin. Okay, so you have, when you commit a sin, like eating prohibited food, unwittingly, right? You didn't do it on purpose. So it's for that you can bring a sin offering. If you did it intentionally, then you have other forms of atonement, but not the ability to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. The sin offering of a regular Jew is different than the sin offering of a king, right? Because God said you're going to make an example of kings and high priests. It's kind of a bigger, more dramatic spectacle when they bring an offering, so that everyone should know that all are held liable to the law, even if they're high priests or kings. Okay, so what does it say? So it is a dispute between the Tanaim. So with respect to a high priest or a king who sinned unwittingly, if they committed the sin before they became king or high priest, and then they were appointed, and then they became aware of the transgression that they committed before their appointment, but they only become aware of it after they're appointed, so they are like commoners. They must bring a female sheep or goat like any ordinary individual who sinned, rather than the bull brought by a high priest who has sinned, or the male goat brought by a king who has sinned, right? They bring the same sin offering as everyone else because they committed it when they were like everyone else. Rabbi Shimon says, if their sin became known to them before they were appointed, even if they did not bring their offering before they were appointed, they are liable to bring the offering of a commoner. However, according to Rabbi Shimon, if their sin became known to them only after they were appointed, then they are entirely exempt from bringing an offering at all, as their change in status necessitates a corresponding change in their offering, and therefore their first obligation is entirely nullified. Now that's odd. You would have thought, okay, well, they become aware of it later. Either they're going to bring the offering they would have brought as a commoner, or now that they have a status change, they're going to bring the offering of a king or a high priest, like they would for any unwitting sin that they committed while they were king or high priest. But according to Rabbi Shimon, the change in status means, no, you would have brought the female goat, but now that you're a king or high priest, it's inappropriate for you to bring a high goat, a female goat, as a sin offering. So you're not going to be able to bring an offering. Your atonement will have to take a different form. So this shows that according to Rabbi Shimon, a change in status retroactively affects one's liability for a transgression that he committed in his previous status. A similar law, therefore, should apply in the case of a betrothed young woman who committed adultery and then she became an adult before her sin became known. Now we're on 45b. Now the Gemara questions this comparison. How are you going to learn about the law of a betrothed young woman and which death penalty applies to her when it's found out that she committed adultery as a young woman, but the information didn't come out until she's an adult? How can you compare that to the case of a king or a high priest who committed an unwitting transgression before their status change? Say that we heard that Rabbi Shimon follows even the awareness, i.e. Rabbi Shimon takes into consideration the time when the sin became known to the high priest or king, and he maintains that he cannot bring the offering of a commoner. However, Did you hear him say that he follows the time of the awareness and does not follow the time of the sin? If so, let him bring the offering that befits his current status. One anointed to be the high priest brings a bull, and a prince, meaning a king in this context, offers a goat, a male goat. Consequently, there is no proof that according to Rabbi Shimon, if the sin of a betrothed young woman became known after she reached majority, that she is sentenced to the death penalty of a grown woman rather than that of a young woman. And the Gemara responds, nevertheless, this issue is subject to a dispute. Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say to the Tana, i.e. the sage who would recite statements of the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah before him, and who recited Sheila's ruling with regard to a betrothed young woman, didn't he say, teach that she is sentenced to stoning rather than strangulation, the punishment of the young woman? And the Gemara questions Rabbi Yochanan's statement. But why? The merciful one says, a betrothed young woman. But this one is a grown woman. And Rabbi Ilya said, the verse states, the young woman, in reference to the young woman that she already was at the time of her sin, despite the fact that she now has a different status. So Rabbi Hanina said to Rabbi Ilya, if so, if her status is determined according to the time of her transgression, let the husband who defames her also be flogged, and let him also pay the 100 selah if his claim turns out to be false. And Rabbi Ilya said to him, may the merciful one save us from following this opinion, as your argument is illogical. Rabbi Hanina replied, on the contrary, may the merciful one save us from your opinion, as yours is the baseless opinion. And the Gemara asks, and what is the reason that she is considered a young woman with regard to the death penalty of stoning, but a grown woman when it comes to paying the fine of the defamer? In other words, if the basic principle is a young woman who is betrothed and commits adultery, her punishment is stoning. An adult woman who commits adultery, and it's proven, her punishment is strangulation. A man who, as a husband who falsely accuses his wife, of having committed adultery or not being a virgin, he is the defamer, right? And he has one outcome if she's a young woman and a different outcome if she is a grown woman. So do these laws, are they related to each other? That's what they're examining. So the Gemara asks, and what is the reason that she is considered a young woman with regard to stoning, but a grown woman when it comes to the fine of that aspect of the punishment of the defamer? And Rabbi Yitzhak bar Avin said, and some say this answer was given by Rabbi Yitzhak bar Abba, with regard to this one, i.e. the woman who sinned, her act of adultery caused her punishment. Whereas that one, the husband who wrongfully defamed his wife, the twisting of his lips caused his punishment, i.e. he sinned by speaking. He elaborates, this one, her action caused her punishment. When she committed adultery, she was a young woman who committed adultery, and so she is sentenced like a young woman. And that one, the husband, the twisting of his lips caused his punishment. When does he become liable? At the time when he defamed her. And at that time, she was a grown woman. And that's why the law that applies to him is the law of defaming a grown woman as opposed to defaming a young woman. Now, the sages taught in a baraisa, in the case of a betrothed young woman who committed adultery, one stones her at the entrance to her father's house. And if she does not have an entrance to her father's house, one stones her at the entrance to the gate of that city. And in a city that is mostly populated by Gentiles, where she cannot be stoned at the city entrance, one stones her at the entrance to the court. In a similar manner, you say, with regard to one who engaged in idol worship, one stones him at the entrance to the gate where he worshipped idols. And in a city that is mostly inhabited by Gentiles, one stones him at the entrance to the court. Right? So if you're going to enforce a death penalty, and recall, once again, how rare the death penalty was, that in rabbinic courts, the Talmud holds elsewhere that a court that actually executes a defendant more than once in 70 years is considered a murderous court, right? That's why when we study the laws of which death penalties are being applied, we're really going after the principle much more than a practical matter. Now, the Gemara asks, now we're drawing a comparison between two sinners who receive the death penalty of being stoned, right? The young woman who commits adultery and the idol worshiper. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived that one stones an idol worshiper And so now that they're going to receive the death penalty, where are we going to carry it out? How much publicity do we want to generate for this death penalty, right? For this execution? With her, it says at the gate of her father's house. With the idol worshiper, it would seem to be at the gate of the city. In other words, in front of everyone in town. But if you live in a town that is mostly populated by Gentiles, really you want it to be where the Jewish community will see it and not publicize this execution in front of the whole town. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived that one stones an idol worshiper in the place where he worshipped? As the sages taught, it states with regard to one who worshipped an idol, then you shall bring forth that man or that woman who have done this evil thing to your gates, and you shall stone them with stones that they die. Now, your gates, quote, your gates, this is the gate where he worshipped idolatry. The offender is taken there to be stoned. Now, do you say it is the gate where he worshipped, or perhaps it is only the gate where he was sentenced, i.e. the gate of the courthouse? So the Gemara answers, it is stated your gates below in the verse, and it is stated your gates above in this verse. If there is found in the midst of you within any of your gates a man or woman who does that which is evil in the sight of the Lord your God in transgressing his covenant. So now, just as your gates stated in that verse is referring to the gate where he worshipped, in the first verse is referring to the gate where he worshipped, so too the phrase your gates stated below in this verse we're now bringing with regard to execution means the gate where he worshipped idols. Now, alternatively, the idol worshiper is executed at your gates and not at the gates of Gentiles. Maybe your gates just means at the gates where the Jews congregate and not where others, non-Jews, congregate, as opposed to the place where the idol worshiper did his idol worshiping. So the Gemara asks, well, this term, your gates, you have already used it to indicate that he is stoned at the gate where he worshipped idols. How then can you derive another law from this expression? And the Gemara answers, if so, if it teaches only one law, let the verse say, it would have said, you'll perform this execution at your gate. For what reason does it state your gates, plural? This indicates that the verse is referring to the gates of cities inhabited by Jews, and therefore one can conclude two conclusions from it. So the Gemara asks, we found a source that indicates that in a case of idolatrous worship, the perpetrator is stoned at the gate of the city where he committed his sin. From where do we derive that a betrothed young woman who is not stoned at the entrance to her father's house is stoned at the gate of the city? Why is she not stoned at the gate of her father's house? Either because her father doesn't own a house, or because she doesn't have a father. Maybe she's an orphan. So Rabbi Abahu said, one derives by verbal analogy as follows. The meaning of the term entrance, stated with regard to a betrothed woman who committed adultery, is derived from that term entrance that appears with regard to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the verse, the entrance of the gate of the courtyard, right? So now they're defining what does entrance mean. And for that, they're going to look at a place where the word entrance is used with respect to the tabernacle. Strange parallel. You'd think maybe the word entrance was used somewhere else, but it makes perfect sense that when you're taking a defined term, you're going to take it from the kind of holiest, most easily understood use of the word entrance, and that would be the entrance to the tabernacle. Okay, so where am I? That appears with the word with regard to the tabernacle in the verse, the entrance of the gate of the courtyard, Numbers 4:26. And the meaning of this usage of the term entrance is derived from the term gate, which appears in the same phrase. And the meaning of this usage of the term gate is derived from the term your gates with regard to idolatry. And this teaches what? That a young woman who was betrothed and committed adultery is executed at the gate of the city, similar to one who engaged in idol worship. The sages taught in a Baraisa, one who defames his wife is flogged and gives 100 selah. And Rabbi Yehuda says, right, so who is this? This is that husband who decides he doesn't want to be married to his new wife, and he concocts an idea that the way to get out of this marriage is to accuse her of being a non-virgin as she comes into the marriage, and it's false. He lied, right? So what are the punishments going to be? He has to give this big fine of 100 selah, which is the difference between a virgin and a non-virgin's dowry, and he's going to lose the right ever to divorce her since he already married her, and he's flogged because he lied in court, right? So one who defames his wife is flogged and gives 100 selah. Rabbi Yehuda says, as for flogging, he is flogged in any case. However, with regard to the 100 selah, if he defamed her after he had intercourse with her, he gives the money. But if he did not yet have intercourse with her, he does not give her this sum. Now the Gemara comments, these Tanaim disagree with regard to the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis. And this is what the first Tana is saying. The defamer is flogged and gives 100 selah, whether he had intercourse with his wife or whether he did not have intercourse with her, in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. That's the majority opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, as for flogging, he is flogged in any case. But with regard to the 100 selah, if he had intercourse, he gives the money, whereas if he did not have intercourse with his new wife yet, he does not give it to her. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that the law of the defamer applies only to a husband who had relations with his wife. That's unclear here. What do you mean? Like this fine that he pays, are you saying that if he defames his wife after betrothed her, but before he consummated the marriage, that he still pays the money, but he gives it to her father rather than to her, because once he marries her and consummates the union by sleeping with her, then she's an adult, no longer a young woman, and so he still pays the money, but he pays it directly to her, or that he doesn't pay it at all? Unclear. So there are those who say that this entire Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and this is what the Baraisa is saying. The defamer is flogged, and he gives 100 selah, but this applies only if he had previously had intercourse with his wife. Rabbi Yehuda says, as for flogging, he is flogged in any case, as only the fine is dependent on whether the couple has previously had intercourse or not. And the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yehuda hold that with regard to flogging, he is flogged in any case? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says if he had intercourse with his wife before he defamed her, he is flogged. But if he did not have intercourse with his wife before he defamed her, he is not flogged. And in answer to this question, Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak said, when Rabbi Yehuda said that he is flogged even if he had not yet had intercourse with his wife, he was referring to lashes for rebelliousness, mardut, which apply only by rabbinic law. Since he lied, defamed his wife, and endangered her life by accusing her of a sin that carries the death penalty, the court punishes him. But this punishment is not by Torah law. The Torah doesn't specify flogging in that case. The rabbis added that penalty. Now we're at the top of 46a. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. Rav Papa said, what of the statement that is taught there in the Baraisa that it is only if he had intercourse with her that he is flogged? It is referring to the money of the fine. And the Gemara asks, and does one call monetary payment flogging? How can you say that he's flogged in any case, that this refers to the fine? We've separated, right? There's the flogging and there's the fine. Now, earlier in our journey through this tractate, we saw that either you receive corporal punishment or you pay a fine, not both, for the same transgression. But it might be that in terms of defaming the wife, one transgression is defaming her, and the other transgression is lying to the court. It's maybe the same lie, but it really is two different transgressions. So maybe you can pay a fine and be flogged. But now we're getting an opinion that says, well, maybe the word flogging in this case actually refers to paying money. What are we talking about? Rav Papa said, what is this statement that is taught there in the Baraisa? That only if he had intercourse with her is he flogged. It is referring to money. And the Gemara asks, does one call monetary payment flogging? The Gemara answers, yes, and we learned it in a Baraisa. One who says, half my valuation is upon me, he gives his valuation in accordance with the sum fixed by the Torah according to gender and age, right? You can make a vow to give a certain amount of money to the temple as a donation to the temple. And one way to pick the amount that you're going to give is my valuation, right? So the Torah says that a person has a value. This is not your value in the marketplace if you're sold as a slave, where, a highly skilled person like a medical doctor is going to go for more money as a slave than a seamstress, right? Somebody who's a tailor, somebody who has needle skills, important, but not as valuable as a medical doctor, right? But when the Torah talks about valuation, it just means that an adult male has a value, an adult female has a different value, a child male, child female, elder male, elder female, all have different values, and you could just vow to give your valuation as a donation to the temple. What if somebody says, I will give half my valuation? So Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says he is flogged and he gives his full valuation. And the sages inquired, why is he flogged? What transgression did he commit? He's going to give a free will offering, a donation to the temple, and the amount that he set is half his valuation. Now you can say, I will give $1, or I'll give $10, or I'll give $100. Why are you going to be punished for saying I give half my valuation? It's not that you said something wrong by that amount is not enough. You can give a much smaller amount and you'll be thanked for it. Why is he flogged for promising to give half his valuation? Why is he flogged? What transgression did he commit? Rav Papa said he is flogged by having to pay a full valuation. He's not whipped. And this proves that monetary payment can be referred to as flogging. Now the Gemara clarifies, what is the reason of Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda? Why would you make him give the full amount if he said he's going to give half the amount and call it a flogging? It is a rabbinic decree in the case of one who vows to donate half of his valuation, due to a case where one vowed the valuation of half of himself. And one who vows to donate the valuation of half of himself has effectively vowed to donate the valuation of a limb upon which his life depends, for example, his head or his heart, in which case it is as though he vowed to donate his entire valuation. Consequently, even one who vows to donate half of his valuation must donate his entire valuation. Right? It was a case where you shouldn't have been so clever to say, I want to, give a donation and tie it to my valuation, but not give the full valuation, because you can't do that. It's just a formula that was considered inappropriate. If you only want to donate $10, donate $10. But if you want to tie it to your valuation, as it's stated biblically, then you have to give your full valuation or more. All right, that's what we've got tonight. I'm going to go to comments and questions now. Reminder, no class tomorrow night. Nina and I are going to a wedding, so won't be able to teach the Sunday night class, but we'll resume on Monday with a double daf so we can catch up. Sharon, so we were at an Ufruf today. Where does that fit in with the marriage contract sequence historically? That's so funny that you were at an Ufruf today. I was at an Ufruf today for the wedding that we're going to tomorrow. So the Ufruf is a party that you have on Shabbos, where you kind of sponsor a nice kiddush for the community as you're celebrating the fact that the nuptials are coming up. It's a good question because now in modern times, the betrothal and the marriage happen on the same day. Whereas in ancient times, the betrothal usually preceded the full marriage by a year. So when did they have that party? The Ufruf, right, that Sharon's talking about, that I attended today also, probably before the betrothal, but I'm not sure. It's a good question. If you learn more about that, let me know. Sharon also says, at the risk of sounding insensitive to the subtleties, what is the practical difference by execution by stoning or strangulation? Isn't the dead in the end? Yes, but the Torah has 4 different kinds of death penalty. And it matters because we're just learning what is the law, right? This is another one of these cases where, as I mentioned, we had no incidents, right? No real life stories. We're just really searching for the principle of it. And what mattered here was, are we applying the death penalty of the young woman or the death penalty of the grown woman? And why would we apply one or the other? What is the actual difference? I mean, obviously, right? Death penalty is death penalty. But it's just that the Torah specifies different death penalties for different crimes. Why does it do that? I would say that's a hook, right? That's one of those laws that we don't understand. Right, chukim as opposed to mishpatim. The chukim are the laws that are supra-rational, right? We don't understand them with our rational mind. We just do it because God said so, as opposed to the more rational laws, right? So it's rational that you're going to have a legal system that says you can't steal, you can't murder. It's beyond our rationality to say, why does the legal system say you can't have a cheeseburger, right? Or even that you have to keep Shabbos. I mean, we get so many advantages that are beautiful and spiritual and uplifting from keeping Shabbos, right? But it's not, it's not something that is just that you understand that any society needs Shabbos in order to function correctly, because that's not true. Many societies don't have Shabbos, right? Most don't. So we do it because God said so, and God decreed that certain transgressions result in stoning, And by the way, stoning does not mean that you put a person in front of a crowd and they all throw rocks at them. That's not what stoning is. Stoning means this person is thrown off a cliff to their death. Strangulation that we've been talking about tonight does not mean that some executioner or the victim or someone like that comes along and chokes the one who is subject to that death penalty. I think strangulation is they pour molten lead down the person's throat. It's still a death penalty, but that's how that works. Then there's beheading, which is done. That's what it sounds like. It's done with a sword. But I think it's called death by the sword, and it actually has to be a beheading, and you can't just run the sword through, the person's stomach. And there's a fourth that I'm not remembering right now. Again, we recoil at studying these laws in detail because it's so uncomfortable for us, and it seems like such a heavy penalty. And why would God decree such a thing? The answer is, in the ancient world, these were not uncommon penalties. What was really uncommon was the immense hurdle that the sages created before ever imposing the death penalty. And just this huge sort of trial process, and civil procedure and criminal procedure, etc., before a death penalty would ever be imposed, that made it so incredibly rare. That was unusual in the ancient world, which is a much more violent society that was run by dictators and kings, etc., who were, quite quick to execute. Just think of what the Romans were doing. Execution was a common occurrence, right, in the imperial Rome. So what we're really studying here is the nuance of why would one law apply and not the other, and what is the principle that we can learn from that. Repeating one last time, no class tomorrow. We'll see you on Monday. A good Vok, Shavua Tov. May we all be blessed with a good, refreshing, uplifting week where we accomplish a lot in furthering each of our personal mission that we were sent into this world to do. If you don't know what your mission is to figure out what is your mission. But this world needs you to do something, to give this world something that only you can give it. That's why God sent you here. And may you move, a significant step forward in furthering your mission as an individual, as one of the Jewish people, if you're a Jew, as one of the children of God, if you're a non-Jew. But we all have a mission in this world. Have a great night and a good week. Shavua Tov.